You know him as a master of the macabre, the father of the detective story, a true literary genius. But the single greatest mystery Edgar Allan Poe ever left us was his own death. So let's get into it.
Picture this. It's 1849. On a street in Baltimore, a man is found slumped against a wall, completely delirious. It's Edgar Allan Poe, the famous author of The Raven, but he's a total mess. He can't speak coherently, and he's wearing these cheap, shabby clothes that are definitely not his. He has no idea how he got there or what happened to him.
So that's the big question, right? For over 170 years, this has been bugging historians, fans, you name it. It's a real-life detective story where the victim is the guy who basically invented the whole genre.
To start figuring this out, we have to rewind a bit and look at the last, very puzzling days of his life.
See, Poe was supposed to be traveling from Richmond to New York, but he never made it. He just turns up in Baltimore. At the hospital, he was completely out of it, suffering from these vivid hallucinations and just total confusion. He never became clear-headed enough to explain anything before he passed away 4 days later.
And if you think the official record is going to clear things up, think again. It just makes everything even murkier. The cause of death was listed as congestion of the brain, which was basically a catch-all term back then for, well, anything. To make things worse, his death certificate and all his medical records vanished. The only real clue we have is a name he apparently kept saying over and over, Reynolds. And to this day, nobody has a clue who Reynolds was.
So how in the world did he end up like that? Well, before you can even get into the theories about his death, you have to understand the chaos of his life.
Poe's life was, to put it mildly, a precarious existence. He was an orphan by the age of 2, a university dropout, and he even got himself kicked out of West Point. He eventually found fame as a brilliant but notoriously harsh literary critic and, of course, as a poet, especially after The Raven just blew up overnight. But his life was always haunted by tragedy, by poverty, and by his struggles with alcohol. Things got especially bad after his young wife Virginia died, which just left him completely shattered.
So with a life that turbulent, it's really no surprise there are some pretty wild theories about how it all ended. Let's take a look at the leading suspects.
Okay, so let's break these down. First up, this thing called cooping. You have to remember, Poe was found on Election Day. Cooping was this brutal type of voter fraud where gangs would just grab some poor soul off the street, get them drunk or drugged, change their clothes, and then drag them around to vote at different places over and over. This theory fits the strange clothes, his delirious state, and the timing almost perfectly. Then you've got medical possibilities, like maybe a brain lesion that made him super sensitive to alcohol. But honestly, one of the most compelling modern theories is rabies. I mean, think about the symptoms: confusion, delirium, hallucinations, and the timeline. Dying 4 days after he was found is also incredibly consistent with the disease. And finally, yeah, poisoning was considered, but modern science has pretty much ruled it out.
The mystery of Poe's death didn't just spawn a bunch of theories. It also helped cement this dark, twisted caricature of the man himself. And a lot of that is thanks to one of his biggest rivals. Right after Poe died, this literary rival, a guy named Rufus Griswold, wrote this absolutely scathing biography. He painted Poe as a depraved, drunken madman. And that image, it stuck. Now, Poe definitely had his demons, but Griswold's account was a deliberate hit piece. It created this caricature that, for a lot of people, has totally overshadowed the reality of who he was, a meticulous, brilliant artist. And the mystery didn't stop there. For decades, it took on a life of its own through this really strange and kind of beautiful tradition. Every single year, on Poe's birthday, this shadowy figure known only as the Poe Toaster would visit his grave in the middle of the night. Think about that. For over 70 years, without fail, this anonymous person left the exact same tribute: 3 red roses and a half-empty bottle of cognac. And then, on Poe's 200th birthday in 2009, the toaster just stopped coming. Gone. Adding one last perfect layer to the Poe legend.
So if we look past all the mystery and the myths, what is Poe's true legacy? Well, it turns out his work didn't just entertain us, it changed literature forever.
Poe was so much more than a horror writer. He was a true innovator. He perfected the psychological thriller, he dabbled in themes that were really early science fiction, and, with his character C. Auguste Dupin, he literally invented the modern detective story. He created the blueprint that Sherlock Holmes would later make famous.
And behind all that madness was a very precise method.
Poe argued that a good story should be built backwards from the feeling you want the reader to have. He said every single word, every plot point should all work together to achieve this unity of impression. And for Poe, that impression was very often a feeling of pure dread. You can see his fingerprints all over our culture today. I mean, think about the very first Treehouse of Horrors episode of The Simpsons, where Homer reads The Raven. For a lot of us, that was probably our first introduction to Poe's work.
Or you have the movie The Raven, starring John Cusack, which turns his mysterious final days into a thriller, where he's solving murders based on his own stories. His life and his work, they just continue to fascinate us.
In the end, maybe Poe himself described his own fate best with this quote. We may never know for sure what happened in those final, shadowy days. And maybe that's the most perfectly Poe-like ending of all, a masterpiece of mystery left unsolved.